What's up, guys? How are you all doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel. And today I want to talk about a nice, simple, non-controversial topic, which is Pokemon. Okay, clearly I'm joking when I say that because, as we all know, man oh man, every single time a Pokemon game releases, there is some kind of huge debate and controversy around the release of that game, and so many folks within the, Pokemon fan base and Pokemon community, of which I personally am not a part of, everyone gets up in arms and is debating some sort of thing surrounding that game. And that is, of course, happening with the two newest games, which are called Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. And through that, there's actually a different conversation brewing, which, if you guys know me, is actually something that I am very much invested in and have very strong opinions about. And it's whether or not the struggling performance of the newest Pokemon games might actually relate to needing a new, upgraded, more powerful piece of Nintendo hardware to make games like this run and perform better. Now, before I start to get into the weeds and dissect and discuss this for you guys, I do want to just quickly get out here, right at the beginning of this conversation, that I don't think that's true. What I don't believe is that Pokemon's struggling performance is a sign that the Switch needs to be upgraded. I think the signs that the Switch need to be upgraded have existed for a while, and as you know, I've already been predicting we would see the next Nintendo hardware next year in 2023. So I don't see Pokemon's issues as indicative of the Switch's lack of power. However, I do still think there are problems with the fact that Pokemon is struggling, and I don't think it's related to the Switch hardware thing, but I obviously am so invested in this concept around new Switch hardware, new Nintendo hardware, next-gen console from Nintendo, whatever form it takes, that obviously people talking about this has been very interesting to me. And I always enjoy discussing Pokemon as a franchise from the outsider looking in perspective, right? You guys have heard me do that many times over the years because I'm a huge, diehard, lifelong Nintendo fan going back to the 80s with the NES, yet I've never been a Pokemon fan. I was just a little bit too old to get into it when it hit stateside. My younger brother was very much into it on the original Game Boy, the original releases, which I think are like blue and yellow or something. He was into them at the time. I was like, I don't know, 17, 18 or so when that maybe was happening, and so I just never got into it. So while being a Nintendo fan, I've never been a Pokemon fan, but it's interesting to discuss the way Pokemon fans and the Pokemon community reacts to it. I mean, a lot of you guys who are a part of that fan base, things get wild every time a new Pokemon game comes out, man. There's always a problem. There's always an issue. I do have opinions on what's happening with the performance problems with Scarlet and Violet. And again, the next-gen Nintendo thing, so it's all very exciting for me to talk about, so let's just jump into it. So first, let's talk about Pokemon. And again, the disclaimer is, as I've already said in the intro here, that I'm not a Pokemon fan with almost no experience of the series. I played Pokemon Shield for like 5 hours thinking I would maybe get into the series. That was my one attempt to get into it, and I did not enjoy it. Not bad, it wasn't poorly made, it's not about any of that, it's just not a franchise or a gameplay or a visual style or a story or a concept that just interests me. There was nothing about it that interests me. My wife is a big fan. And like I said, plenty of my friends are big fans. For me, it didn't grab me. So my experience of the Pokemon franchise is literally limited to the characters I've played in the Smash Brothers series and to 5 hours with Pokemon Shield. That was it. Maybe 10 hours. Maybe it was like 5 to 10 hours. So as a non-fan, when I see what's happening with these two new Pokemon games and the insane amount of bugs and the very underwhelming graphics and the frame rate issues and all of the glitches and problems people are seeing, I gotta tell you, it's pretty disappointing. Not because it saddens me as a Pokemon fan, because I'm not a Pokemon fan. It's just really disappointing and kind of disrespectful for Game Freak and Nintendo to allow a series this popular and successful and this unfathomably profitable. The revenue that Pokemon generates is obscene, and the fact that they can't put more time into these games to make them look and run appropriately, honestly, I think is disrespectful to you guys as Pokemon fans. I mean, if you're a Pokemon fan, you can tell me if you disagree. I don't want to like speak for you or whatever, as corny as that sounds when it comes to video games. I'm not trying to like speak for you, but You know, I'm a game fan. I'm a Nintendo fan. I'm 42 years old. I've been playing games for like over, 3.5 decades, longer really. So I can look at what's happening with Pokemon and without being a fan of the series, still feel bad for people who are fans of that series who aren't getting what I think they truly deserve in terms of quality. It's just what I see Game Freak and Nintendo doing with these games is just simply not okay. I think most of us with a brain know exactly why this happens with the Pokemon games, and it's simply because people keep buying these games to those obscene numbers that I was just talking about. They make so much money. These games break records and sell like crazy every time, no matter what the controversy is. No matter what percentage of the massive Pokemon fan base is pissed off at Pokemon by the time a new game releases, it doesn't matter because all of y'all, fans and non-fans alike, buy these games. And so Nintendo and Game Freak's incentive to actually put more time into these games and make them worthwhile is almost none. Like, what's their incentive? They can put so little time, effort, and money into these games, and they can release what seems to be a shit product with these two newest games, and everyone buys it. You guys still buy these games, right? So if you're upset about what's happening with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, but you bought it anyway, then you're part of the problem. Now, if you're not upset with what happened and you bought the games, or maybe you bought the games and you've decided you don't care and you're otherwise having fun, that's a different story. In my opinion, you're technically doing nothing wrong as far as the franchise goes. You're having your own amount of fun with it. You've justified your purchase, and there's no problem with that. I'm really only talking about the people who are completely upset with Game Freak and with these releases, yet still decided to throw your money to the game. That's where I think the part of the fan base that's maybe part of the problem comes into play. You're not serving the franchise that you love well if you support it while also having these issues with it. And so, again, as somebody who doesn't play the franchise, that's just kind of how I see it, man. There are so many videos that are ridiculous, showing glitches and graphical problems and bugs and characters who just are like glitching through their own bodies, and just frame rate performances that are just not acceptable in 2022. Even with the outdated Switch hardware, we know it's more capable than what these Pokemon games are doing, which is what's going to lead into the next topic here. And so I don't know. I'm not a fan, so I'm not here to speak for the Pokemon community, but speaking as a game fan, what I see coming from one of the biggest franchises in video game history is simply not acceptable. Now let's talk about the more fun and exciting part of the conversation to me, which is how this potentially informs the concept of a new piece of hardware from Nintendo. In whatever shape, in whatever form factor, in whatever name it comes in, now some people are saying, Pokemon runs like shit, and so it's time for new Nintendo hardware because the Switch is clearly no longer powerful enough to get the job done. And so going back to what I said earlier, what I don't think is true is that Pokemon's issue is part of the problem here. Because as I said here, as many people have pointed out, the Switch, yes, it's outdated and it is time for new hardware. I do agree with that. However, the problems with the new Pokemon games are not at all the result of what the Switch is capable of. There are tons and tons and hundreds of examples of games that are running on the Switch that look and run and perform way better than Pokemon. The problems with Pokemon are the problems with Game Freak and the lack of effort and care that they're putting into these games. It's really, like I said in the beginning, disrespectful to Pokemon fans. But the Switch is capable of a game like Breath of the Wild, and it's capable of a game like Astral Chain, or Luigi's Mansion 3, or Bayonetta 3, or Dragon Quest 11, or The Witcher 3, or Doom, and Doom Eternal, and so many other examples. Really incredible and impressive games. And sure, these games don't look or run as great as they would on other consoles. We know the PS5 and the Series X and even the PS4 and Xbox One are all more capable than the Switch. But the Switch can still run way more impressive games and make them look ultimately fine and run at decent frame rates. The problem with Pokemon is entirely on Nintendo and entirely on Game Freak. That is a unique situation that isn't exposing the issues with the Switch. To me, the issues with the Switch are much more far-reaching than Pokémon Scarlet and Violet's issues. And so really, I can just use this conversation to revisit this topic, which I haven't talked about in many, many months, and just double down on what I've been saying for over 2 years. I want you guys to remember, man, I'm saying it right here and now. If next year, in 2023, we see or hear about brand new Nintendo hardware that is next-gen capable or more powerful than the current Switch and is going to run games exclusively on it that the regular 2017 Switch can't run. If that happens, I want you to remember I was the first person on YouTube that you know that said new Nintendo hardware will come in 2022 or 2023. Okay, and I predicted it for those exact windows. I didn't just say, oh yeah, they're making the next big thing, because of course they are. They're always doing that. I specifically targeted the window of 2022 or 2023. So if it happens next year, like I think it will, that's been what I predicted over 2 years ago. And I know I was the first person on YouTube to predict that specific window. If it happens in 2024 or later, then my prediction will have been wrong. And I've said that on Twitter and on YouTube for 2 years. Okay, I'm focusing on a specific window. And I bring this all up because, again, the Pokemon problem made people think that that shows that the next hardware has to come next year. And I just don't think Pokemon is the sign. I think there's so many other signs, which is why I was able to see it coming 2 years ago. And nowadays, here in the last couple of months of 2022, we are seeing the next-gen Nintendo Switch conversation pop up like crazy. Finally, the rest of the internet and plenty of my fellow YouTubers are catching up to where I was 2 years ago, saying 2023 is the time for new Nintendo hardware. It's time for it to happen. And of course, don't get me wrong. I'm not too proud to say that if I'm wrong, I won't talk about it. Of course I'll talk about it. It's not going to hurt me or hurt my ego to say that, hey, I was wrong, guys. I thought it would happen in 2022 or 2023. And it didn't happen, and so let's talk about why I was wrong. I will have no problems discussing it at that time. But I will at the same time be very proud of myself if I end up also being correct. If the 2019 and 2020 version of myself that predicted new hardware in 2023 is correct, of course I'm going to talk about it and be proud of myself and share the fact that, hey, I was able to so accurately predict what Nintendo would do 2 or 3 years ahead of time, because when I used my brain to analyze the situation and think forwardly, I saw what was clear to me, that 2023 would be the time for Nintendo to introduce this new hardware. And so, again, I don't see Pokemon as part of this conversation, really. And luckily, to wrap this up, I will say, while a lot of people have said Pokemon's issues are signs that the Switch needs to be replaced, there are also people pushing back, saying, no, no, no. Pokemon isn't part of this conversation. Look at Dragon Quest, look at Doom, look at Breath of the Wild, look at Mario Odyssey. The Switch is capable of way more than Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and so that's more on Game Freak and Nintendo than it is on the Switch's capabilities. So there are people on both sides of this conversation. I, as somebody who has been championing next-gen Switch hardware for 2 years, obviously just wanted to throw my 2 cents into the ring and ultimately say that Pokemon is doing a disservice to the Pokemon fan bases by releasing in such a shitty state, and also state that I think next-gen Nintendo hardware is coming next year, but I don't think Pokemon has anything to do with it.